Delete everything, Danielle. Every single file, every backup, every trace of your so-called investigation. Bryce Langford's voice cut through the silence of his corner office like a blade. I sat across from his mahogany desk, my hands folded calmly in my lap, watching his face flush red with barely contained rage. You're too emotional to handle confidential information. Women like you can't keep secrets. My name is Danielle Monroe, and I'm 32 years old. For the past 4 years, I've worked as a forensic compliance analyst at Westbrook Capital Management here in Charlotte, North Carolina. My job is simple: monitor trading patterns, investigate suspicious activities, and ensure our firm operates within federal regulations. What makes me good at my job isn't just my attention to detail. It's my ability to remain calm when others lose their composure. Like right now, for instance. While Bryce paced behind his desk like a caged animal, I remained perfectly still. The evidence I'd compiled over the past 6 weeks sat between us in a thick manila folder. Trading records, email timestamps, broker communications, IP address logs, all meticulously documented and cross-referenced. The pattern was undeniable. Someone at Westbrook had been making suspiciously timed trades just days before major public announcements. Someone with access to confidential information from our corporate clients. Someone like Bryce Langford himself. I understand your concerns, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. But these irregularities need to be reported to the Securities Commission. It's not just company policy. It's federal law. Bryce stopped pacing and leaned forward, his palms flat against the desk. Federal law? Let me tell you about law, sweetheart. The law is that I'm your boss, and when I tell you to delete something, you delete it. No questions asked. The condescension in his voice made my skin crawl, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd learned long ago that emotional reactions only gave men like Bryce more ammunition. Instead, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a second folder, one he hadn't seen yet. There's something else, I said, placing the folder on his desk. I found additional transactions from last month. The Patterson Industries acquisition, the Meridian Energy merger talks, the Silverton Pharmaceuticals announcement, all of them preceded by unusually large position changes in your personal trading account. For the first time since I'd entered his office, Bryce fell silent. The color drained from his face as he stared at the folder, and I could practically see the calculations running through his mind. He was trapped, and we both knew it. You have no idea what you're playing with, he said finally, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. This industry doesn't forgive mistakes, especially from women who think they're smarter than everyone else. But I wasn't backing down. Not when the evidence was this clear. Not when my integrity was on the line. Growing up in a small town outside Charlotte, I'd always been fascinated by numbers and patterns. While other kids played with dolls or video games, I spent hours organizing my father's business receipts and creating elaborate spreadsheets on our family computer. My parents, both teachers, encouraged my analytical nature and pushed me to pursue mathematics in college. After earning my degree in forensic accounting from the University of North Carolina, I'd worked my way up through several firms before landing at Westbrook Capital Management. The company had a sterling reputation in the industry. Bryce Langford had built it from nothing into one of the Southeast's most respected investment firms. When he offered me the compliance position 4 years ago, I thought I'd found my dream job. Bryce had been charming during our initial interviews, praising my attention to detail and promising me autonomy in my investigations. I want someone who isn't afraid to ask tough questions, he'd told me. Someone who will keep us honest. Back then, I'd admired his confidence and vision. He seemed like the kind of leader who valued integrity above profit. How naive I'd been. The first red flag had appeared about 6 months into my tenure. I'd noticed some unusual trading patterns in our emerging markets portfolio, but when I'd brought my concerns to Bryce, he'd dismissed them with a wave of his hand. "You're being too cautious," he'd said. This is how big players operate. You'll understand when you've been in the industry longer. I'd accepted his explanation then, chalking it up to my own inexperience. But similar incidents kept occurring. Trades that seemed too perfectly timed. Information that appeared to leak just before major announcements. Profits that defied market logic. At first, I'd tried to give Bryce the benefit of the doubt. Maybe these were just coincidences. Maybe I was reading too much into normal market fluctuations. But as the patterns became more frequent and more obvious, I couldn't ignore them anymore. The breaking point had come 3 weeks ago during a company meeting. Bryce had been discussing our upcoming quarterly earnings, and he'd made an offhand comment about staying ahead of the curve on the Patterson Industries deal. The problem was, Patterson Industries hadn't announced their acquisition plans yet. That information wouldn't become public for another 4 days. I'd started my investigation that same afternoon, pulling trading records and cross-referencing them with public announcement dates. What I'd found was a systematic pattern of insider trading spanning at least 18 months, millions of dollars in illegal profits. Evidence that could send Bryce to federal prison for years. The smart thing would have been to keep quiet, to look the other way and protect my career. Bryce had connections throughout the industry. He could make my life very difficult if I crossed him. But staying silent would make me complicit in his crimes. My father had always taught me that integrity wasn't negotiable. Do the right thing, he'd say, even when it's the hard thing. Today, in Bryce's office, I was choosing to do the hard thing. I need time to think about this, Bryce said, closing the folder without looking at its contents. His voice had lost its earlier aggression, replaced by something that sounded almost like resignation. Give me the weekend to review everything. We can discuss next steps on Monday. I should have known he was lying. The way his eyes darted toward his computer screen, the nervous drumming of his fingers on the desk, the forced casual tone, all classic signs of deception. But some part of me still wanted to believe that my boss, the man I'd respected for years, would do the right thing when confronted with undeniable evidence. Of course, I said, standing up from my chair. I'll keep the files secure over the weekend. We should probably schedule a meeting with legal on Monday morning to discuss proper reporting procedures. Bryce nodded absently, already reaching for his phone. Yes, legal. Good idea. Have a nice weekend, Danielle. I gathered my things and headed for the door, but something made me pause at the threshold. When I looked back, Bryce was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, almost predatory. It sent a chill down my spine. "Bryce," I said, "is everything all right?" The mask slipped back into place so quickly I almost thought I'd imagined it. "Everything's fine," he said with a forced smile. "Just thinking about how to handle this situation properly. You know how delicate these matters can be." That weekend, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I'd made copies of all the evidence, of course. Keeping backup files was standard procedure in compliance work. But Bryce's reaction had been too calm, too controlled. Men like him didn't usually accept defeat so gracefully. On Sunday evening, I decided to drive past the office. I told myself I was just being paranoid. But as I pulled into the parking garage, I saw Bryce's BMW in its usual spot. The lights were on in his office on the 32nd floor. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching that lit window and trying to decide what to do. Finally, I pulled out my phone and called my college roommate, Jessica, who'd become a securities lawyer in Washington. "Jess, it's Danielle. I need some advice," I said when she picked up. "It's almost 10 p.m. on a Sunday," she laughed. "This must be serious." "It is." I told her everything, the trading patterns, the evidence I'd gathered, Bryce's reaction. Jessica listened without interrupting, occasionally asking for clarification on technical details. "You need to report this immediately," she said when I finished. "Don't wait for Monday. Don't give him time to destroy evidence or create alibis. The Securities Commission has a whistleblower hotline that operates 24 hours a day. But what if I'm wrong? What if there's an explanation I haven't considered?" "Danielle," Jessica's voice was firm. "You've been doing this for 4 years. Trust your instincts. And more importantly, trust your evidence." I hung up and stared at that lit office window, knowing my career at Westbrook Capital Management was about to end. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I walked into the Westbrook building for what I suspected might be the last time. I'd spent most of Sunday night copying files to encrypted drives, following Jessica's instructions on proper evidence preservation. Everything was now stored in multiple secure locations, including a safety deposit box at my bank. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor felt longer than usual. When the doors opened, I was surprised to find the hallways unusually quiet. Normally, Monday mornings buzzed with activity as traders prepared for the opening bell, but today felt different. Subdued. I made my way to my office, a small but well-appointed space overlooking the city's financial district. My desk was exactly as I'd left it. Friday evening, computer locked, files secured, family photos arranged neatly beside my monitor. Everything appeared normal, which somehow made me even more nervous. At exactly 9 a.m., my phone rang. Bryce's assistant, Patricia, sounded unusually formal. "Miss Monroe, Mr. Langford would like to see you in his office immediately." "Of course," I said. "I'll be right there." I grabbed my briefcase, which contained copies of all the evidence, and walked down the hall to Bryce's corner office. The door was closed, which was unusual. Bryce prided himself on having an open-door policy. I knocked and waited for his response. "Come in." Bryce was seated behind his desk, but he wasn't alone. A man in an expensive suit sat in one of the visitor chairs, his back to me. When he turned around, I recognized him immediately. Gregory Holt, Westbrook's head of human resources. My stomach dropped. "Danielle, please have a seat," Bryce said, gesturing to the empty chair beside Gregory. His tone was businesslike, almost cold. This was not the man who'd seemed so rattled on Friday afternoon. I sat down carefully, keeping my briefcase close to my side. "Good morning, Bryce." "Gregory, is this about our discussion on Friday?" Gregory cleared his throat and opened a thick folder on his lap. "Miss Monroe, we've had some time over the weekend to review your recent performance and conduct. Unfortunately, we've identified several concerning issues that require immediate action." My heart began racing, but I kept my voice steady. "What kind of issues?" "Unauthorized access to confidential files," Bryce said, his eyes never leaving mine. "Violation of company security protocols, inappropriate disclosure of sensitive information to outside parties." The accusations hit me like physical blows. "That's completely false," I said. "Everything I accessed was within the scope of my job responsibilities. I haven't disclosed anything to anyone outside the company." "We have evidence suggesting otherwise," Gregory said, pulling out several printed emails. "These communications with your friend Jessica Martinez at the Securities Commission indicate—" "Jessica Martinez?" I interrupted. "I don't know anyone by that name. My friend Jessica is Jessica Rivers, and she's a private practice attorney, not a government employee." Bryce and Gregory exchanged a meaningful look. I realized they were trying to build a case that I'd been leaking information to federal investigators. The problem with their story was that it wasn't true, and they'd gotten the basic facts wrong. "Regardless," Bryce continued, "your recent behavior has demonstrated a lack of judgment and professionalism that we cannot tolerate. Effective immediately, your employment with Westbrook Capital Management is terminated." The words hung in the air like smoke. I'd expected this, but hearing it still felt like a punch to the gut. 4 years of my life, countless late nights and early mornings, all the trust I'd built with colleagues, gone in an instant. "I see," I said quietly, "and I assume this has nothing to do with the evidence I presented to you on Friday." "What evidence?" Bryce asked, his expression perfectly innocent. "You mean those conspiracy theories you were developing?" "Danielle, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You've become paranoid and erratic. You're seeing patterns that don't exist. I stood up slowly, my briefcase still clutched in my hand. They thought they were clever, firing me before I could report them. They thought removing me from the building would eliminate the threat. They had no idea that the evidence was already beyond their reach. I'll need to collect my personal items, I said. Security will escort you, Gregory replied. For everyone's safety. As if on cue, 2 uniformed guards appeared in the doorway. I walked between them with my head high, knowing that every employee in the office was watching. Let them look. By the end of the week, they'd understand exactly who the real criminals were. The security escort to my office was humiliating by design. Bryce wanted everyone to see me being marched out like a common thief, hoping to discredit me before word of my allegations could spread. As we walked through the trading floor, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. Whispers followed in our wake. I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was cataloging every face that watched my downfall with obvious satisfaction. These people would remember this moment very differently once the truth came out. In my office, I was allowed to pack only personal items under the guards' watchful eyes. Family photos, a small plant, my coffee mug. Innocent objects that told the story of 4 years of my life. The guards inspected everything, making sure I wasn't taking any company property. What about my personal files? I asked one of the guards. I have continuing education certificates and performance reviews in my desk. Nothing leaves this office except what HR specifically approves, he replied. Company policy. I nodded and continued packing. They didn't realize that all my important documents had been scanned and stored electronically months ago. The physical papers they were protecting were worthless copies. As I was closing my box of belongings, my computer monitor caught my eye. It was displaying my screensaver, a photo of my parents at their retirement party last year. They looked so proud and happy, completely unaware that their daughter would soon become the center of a federal investigation. I wondered what they'd think when they learned what I was about to do. The walk to the elevator was another parade of stares and whispers. I recognized several colleagues who'd worked with me on various projects over the years. Some looked sympathetic, others curious, a few openly hostile. Human nature in all its complicated glory. In the elevator, one of the guards tried to make small talk. Rough morning, huh? It could be worse, I replied honestly. At least I know I'm doing the right thing. He gave me a strange look, but didn't pursue the conversation. The lobby was mercifully empty except for the receptionist, who avoided eye contact as we passed. Outside, the rain had stopped, and weak sunlight was beginning to break through the clouds. I took it as a good sign. Your access cards and keys, one of the guards said, extending his hand. I handed them over without comment. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my car in a parking garage 6 blocks away, finally allowing myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. I'd been fired from a job I loved, expelled from a company I'd helped build, branded as a security risk and a troublemaker. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I pulled out my phone and dialed Jessica's number. She answered on the first ring. How did it go? She asked. Exactly as we expected, I said. I'm officially unemployed as of 30 minutes ago. They tried to accuse me of leaking information to a fictional SEC contact named Jessica Martinez. Jessica laughed despite the seriousness of the situation. Martinez? Really? They couldn't even get my name right in their fake evidence? Apparently not. Are you ready for phase 2? Absolutely. I've already prepared the filing documents. Everything you sent me over the weekend has been organized and cross-referenced with federal regulations. The Commission's investigative unit is expecting our call. I took a deep breath. Once I made this call, there would be no going back. Bryce would use every connection he had to destroy my reputation. I'd probably never work in compliance again. But some things were more important than career security. Let's do this, I said. Conference call in 5 minutes. And Danielle, you're incredibly brave for doing this. I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified and angry, and absolutely certain that I was about to change everything. The Securities Commission's whistleblower hotline was answered by a crisp, professional voice that immediately put me at ease. Enforcement Division, this is Agent Rebecca Stone. How can I help you? Jessica, who was conferenced in from her Washington office, took the lead. Agent Stone, this is Jessica Rivers, attorney for Danielle Monroe. Miss Monroe is reporting systematic insider trading at Westbrook Capital Management in Charlotte, North Carolina. We have extensive documentation spanning 18 months of illegal activity. I see, Agent Stone said. Miss Monroe, can you give me a brief overview of what you've observed? For the next 20 minutes, I laid out everything I'd discovered. The suspicious trading patterns, the impossibly accurate timing of stock purchases, the correlation between Bryce's personal trades and subsequent public announcements. I kept my voice steady and factual, knowing that emotion would only undermine my credibility. Agent Stone asked detailed questions about my methodology, my access to the trading records, and the security measures I'd taken to preserve the evidence. Her questions told me she was taking this seriously. Miss Monroe, she said finally, I want you to know that what you're describing, if true, represents significant violations of federal securities law. The penalties for insider trading can include substantial fines and prison time. I understand, I said. That's why I couldn't stay silent. What's your current employment status with Westbrook? I was terminated this morning, ostensibly for performance issues. In reality, because I refused to destroy the evidence. There was a pause on the line. Were you specifically asked to destroy evidence? Yes. On Friday afternoon, my supervisor explicitly ordered me to delete all files related to my investigation. When I refused, he became hostile and made several inappropriate comments about women in the finance industry. Agent Stone's voice sharpened with interest. Can you provide documentation of those conversations? I have detailed notes from the meeting, including direct quotes. I also have copies of all the trading records, email communications, and supporting documentation. Everything has been preserved according to federal evidence guidelines. Excellent. Miss Rivers, I assume you've advised your client about potential retaliation? Jessica's voice was firm. We've taken appropriate precautions. All evidence has been secured in multiple locations, and Miss Monroe understands the protection available under federal whistleblower statutes. Good. Miss Monroe, I'm going to transfer you to our Charlotte field office. They'll want to meet with you in person as soon as possible, probably within the next 48 hours. Can you make yourself available? Absolutely. One more thing, and this is very important. Do not contact anyone at Westbrook Capital Management. Don't discuss this investigation with current or former employees. Don't return to the building. We need to ensure the integrity of our investigation isn't compromised. After we hung up, I sat in my car feeling simultaneously exhausted and energized. The wheels were now in motion. Federal investigators would soon be examining every trade, every email, every phone call that had passed through Westbrook's systems. Bryce's carefully constructed empire was about to come crashing down. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Heard about this morning. So sorry. Call me if you need anything. Patricia. Bryce's assistant was reaching out, probably worried about her own job security. I wondered how many other employees had noticed irregularities but stayed quiet out of fear. How many had suspected but lacked the evidence or courage to act. I started my car and pulled out of the parking garage, heading home to prepare for whatever came next. In my rearview mirror, I could see the gleaming tower that housed Westbrook Capital Management, its windows reflecting the afternoon sun like golden shields. By the end of the week, those shields would prove to be made of glass. The call came on Thursday morning at exactly 8:47 a.m. I was sitting in my kitchen, nursing my second cup of coffee and reviewing the documents I'd be presenting to federal investigators later that day. The caller ID showed unknown, but I recognized Agent Stone's voice immediately. Miss Monroe, We've executed search warrants at Westbrook Capital Management. I thought you should know that Mr. Langford has been taken into custody. I set down my coffee cup with shaking hands. 3 days. It had taken federal investigators exactly 3 days to gather enough additional evidence to make an arrest. What charges? Insider trading, securities fraud, obstruction of justice, and witness intimidation. The obstruction charge relates to his attempt to force you to destroy evidence. The intimidation charge covers his threats to your career and those inappropriate comments about women in the industry. Through my kitchen window, I could see the Westbrook building in the distance. At this very moment, FBI agents were probably going through Bryce's office, seizing computers and files, interviewing terrified employees. The man who'd built a financial empire through illegal trades was now wearing handcuffs. Miss Monroe, are you there? Yes, sorry. I'm just processing this. There's more. We've frozen approximately $12 million in accounts linked to Mr. Langford's trading activities. The investigation is expanding to include several other firms where he may have accomplices. $12 million. The number was staggering, but it made sense. 18 months of insider trading, leveraged with borrowed capital, compounding illegal gains month after month. Bryce hadn't just been breaking the law, he'd been building a criminal enterprise. What happens next? The investigation continues. We'll need your formal testimony for the grand jury, probably within the next 2 weeks. Miss Rivers can help you prepare for that process. After I hung up, I walked to my window and stared at the Westbrook building. Somewhere in that glass tower, employees were discovering that their respected managing director was actually a federal criminal. Clients were learning that their trusted advisor had been using their confidential information to enrich himself. The reputation Bryce had spent years building was disintegrating in real time. I thought about all the times he'd condescended to me, all the comments about women being too emotional for high-stakes finance. He'd fired me thinking I was just another disposable employee who could be silenced and discredited. He'd been catastrophically wrong. The news broke at 2 p.m. that same afternoon. Prominent Charlotte investment manager arrested in federal insider trading scheme, read the headline on the Charlotte Observer's website. Within hours, the story had been picked up by the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and every major financial news outlet. I watched the coverage from my living room, feeling surreal as reporters discussed the case I'd helped build. They interviewed former SEC officials about the significance of the charges, legal experts about potential sentences, and industry analysts about the impact on Westbrook's clients. This appears to be one of the most systematic insider trading schemes the Commission has uncovered in recent years, one expert told a CNN reporter. The preliminary evidence suggests profits in the tens of millions over an extended period. My phone had been ringing constantly since the news broke. Former colleagues, friends from college, reporters who'd somehow gotten my number. I ignored them all except for one call from my parents. "Danielle, we just saw the news," my mother said, her voice tight with worry. "Are you safe? Are you involved in this somehow?" I explained what I could without compromising the ongoing investigation. My parents listened in stunned silence as I described Bryce's illegal activities and my decision to report them. "We're so proud of you," my father said finally. "It must have been terrifying to stand up to someone with that much power." "It was," I admitted. "But staying silent would have made me complicit in his crimes." "Your father always said integrity isn't negotiable," my mother added. "I'm glad you remembered that." At 6 p.m., the local news ran a story about Westbrook's clients rushing to withdraw their investments. The stock market had already responded, with financial sector stocks dropping across the board as investors worried about the broader implications of the scandal. By evening, Westbrook Capital Management had suspended all trading activities and hired a crisis management firm. The company Bryce had built was collapsing as rapidly as his criminal scheme had been exposed. I felt no satisfaction in watching the firm's destruction. Too many innocent employees would lose their jobs. But I felt vindicated knowing that justice was finally being served. Tomorrow, the real work would begin as federal prosecutors built their case, and I prepared to testify about everything I'd witnessed. 6 months later, I was sitting in a conference room at Thornfield Legal Partners, one of Charlotte's most prestigious law firms. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows as I reviewed the final terms of my new employment contract. Bryce Langford had been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $14 million in restitution. His co-conspirators at 3 other firms had received similar sentences. The Westbrook investigation had grown into the largest insider trading case in the Southeast's history. Director of Forensic Compliance, I said, reading my new title aloud. I like the sound of that. Margaret Thornfield, the firm's founding partner, smiled across the table. You've earned it. What you did took tremendous courage, and frankly, the industry needs more people like you in positions of authority. My new role would involve overseeing compliance across multiple hedge funds and investment firms, implementing the kind of monitoring systems that could have caught Bryce's scheme much earlier. I'd also be working with federal regulators to develop new industry standards. The irony wasn't lost on me that Bryce's attempt to silence me had actually amplified my voice. His criminal behavior had made me one of the most sought-after compliance experts in the country. As I signed the contract, I thought about the young woman who'd walked into Westbrook 4 years ago, eager to please and afraid to make waves. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood that doing the right thing sometimes meant risking everything. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Saw the announcement about your new job. Congratulations. You've officially made the transition from whistleblower to industry reformer. I smiled and typed back. Thanks. Ready to change this industry from the inside out. The truth was, I was more than ready. I was determined to ensure that what happened at Westbrook could never happen again, and I finally had the platform and authority to make that vision a reality. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let the bad guys win.